Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Jones. I am with UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. I am the Coastal Community Resilience Specialist down here in Brunswick on our coast. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This time around, we've got Jackie Jackson and Courtney Reich, and they're going to talk a little bit about Chatham County's Resilience Roadmap process and project to date, and highlight locally developed projects and strategies with a focus on approaches that can be scaled and replicated in other communities. The roadmap is a county-led, community-driven initiative guiding the county and how they prepare for and respond to its most pressing challenges. It builds on existing plans and efforts, identifies gaps, and sets priority actions to ultimately try and make the community safer, stronger, and more equitable. With us today, like I said, we've got Courtney Reich. She is the Coastal Director for Georgia Conservancy, where she leads coastal conservation and community resilience initiatives out of Georgia Conservancy Savannah office. Her work includes leading the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative implementation team for Georgia, as well as working with local governments throughout coastal Georgia to advance wetland restoration and community resilience. Prior to her work with Georgia Conservancy, Courtney spent 20 years leading an environmental planning consulting practice dedicated to assisting public sector clients solve stormwater, land use, and environmental challenges. Jackie Jackson serves as Chatham County's Georgia's Resilience Program Administrator, launching the county's first resilience program in 2022. A Savannah native, she has dedicated her career to public service with a focus on environmental stewardship and community planning. She previously spent 17 years as Director of Advanced Planning and Special Projects at the Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission, leading long-range land use, environmental, and community planning efforts. Earlier in her career, she managed environmental compliance programs at Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield and oversaw major projects for the city of Garden City. So welcome, everyone, and I'll let you guys go ahead.
Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate it. That's a lot of words to describe your life. I feel really old now. But again, I appreciate the introductions and having us here today. As Megan mentioned, Courtney and myself are going to talk a little bit about the Resilience Roadmap project that Chatham County has been working on for the past, I guess, 8-9 months or so. And as you'll see on the screen, to shorten everything, I put QR codes as our point of contact information, but I think everything will be shared with you later. Should you want copies of any of the slides, and our contact information, of course, as well. So, but again, thank you for joining us. I did want to give just a little bit of background on Chatham County for those who might not be as familiar with just the makeup of the community and where we're at on the coast, since the entire state of Georgia, I guess, might be in here at some point. Our, residents and co-workers throughout the state, that is. So as you can see on the map, we are indeed on the coast. Chatham County actually has 9 different jurisdictions, which, as you can imagine, can lead itself to a lot of different conversations, a lot of different codes and ordinances, and all of that kind of great stuff. So it can make for some tough, workings and roadblocks. So that's kind of part of what this initial effort was really meant to get around, as well as to look at some of those and look at the bigger picture as to what's going on countywide. We definitely here on the coast have seen dramatic population increase over the past number of years. So that is something that we've been delving into and trying to work within our population projections. We're still looking at adding another 40,000 people by 2040, and we'll get into some of this, but some of those numbers were before we knew some of the big Hyundai and manufacturing groups, and port growth was really taking hold as well. So what As mentioned, 4 years ago, the county decided to really start looking at resilience, and our definition of resilience is a little bit bigger, a teeny bit different than a lot of communities. And sometimes when you hear the word resilience, we decided to model our definition of resilience based on the 100 Resilient Cities model. And it has this four main themes and a framework that is really, really great. And so, as you can see, health and well-being, we're looking at the economy and society, which of course leads to growth, leadership and strategy, which is a lot of the codes and ordinances, elected officials, how are we doing things internally? And then, of course, as you can imagine, infrastructure and environment. And what's important is that all of this, they all work together, right? They're not independent of one another. They all affect one another, that true domino effect, if you will. So that's where we have started really diving into these different themes when we're talking about data centers, we're talking about economic development, employment, daycare systems, the job, rates, our land use, transportation, you name it. We're talking about a little bit of everything within this program. But underneath that underlying really infrastructure based is that we're looking at the environment and how are we continuing to bounce back. And we're going to definitely dive into this, but after shocks and stressors with our climate and that type of thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Courtney now.
Sorry, it took me a second there to unmute myself. And sorry, I'm advancing the slides for Jackie, so I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was trying to guess when you wanted to move on. As Megan said, I am Courtney Reich. I'm the Coastal Director for Georgia Conservancy. And we are so pleased to be here sharing this plan with you today. And of course, very excited about the opportunity to work with Chatham County on their resilience journey. Let's see. I do want to start by just sharing where this planning process originated, or the idea for this planning process started, and how it was funded. Georgia Conservancy has a grant from a group, a national nonprofit called the GEOS Institute. And the GEOS Institute has a goal of establishing climate innovation centers that provide climate services to communities in every state in the country. And some of their initial work is here in the Southeast, and specifically, they have a pilot project here in Georgia that funds the Georgia Conservancy here to do the work of what they're calling the Navigator Network. And the Navigator Network is intended to support vulnerable communities that want to increase their resilience, both to shocks like hurricanes and heat waves, but also to underlying stressors in the community, things like housing needs or economic development. So my role as a navigator through this program is to reach out to communities that are struggling with these issues and to help to provide services. And that might be the services of Georgia Conservancy, that might be connecting them to grants or to other resources, or in this case, to a group called Resilient Cities Catalyst, who helped us write a grant called the Climate Smart Communities Initiative. That's the granting program. Together as a group, we wrote this grant and received this grant to put together a resilience roadmap. And the resilience roadmap is not called the resilience plan because it's not intended to be yet another plan. It is a process that looks at all of the existing work that the county has done, all of the existing plans, extracts out of it what is still relevant and what needs to be moved forward, and helps the county chart a path to do that work, to begin implementation, to take those first steps. I want to just give a little bit of a background too on Resilient Cities Catalyst. Jackie mentioned the 100 Resilient Cities programs. So if you're familiar with any of those plans across, for like the 100 largest cities across America, this is really the same group or has a lot of the same members, employees that did that work after the 100 Resilient Cities work was completed. They formed this group to continue to do that work across the country and really internationally. And so Resilient Cities Catalyst helps communities with resilience planning, also project development, scoping, implementation, all phases. We've actually worked with Resilient Cities Catalyst and other communities here in coastal Georgia, both in McIntosh County and Darien, and also in Bullock County, Statesboro, where we had Resilience Accelerator workshops. Those are one-day convenings where we work with community partners across nonprofit sector, across local government, economic sector, to start having this conversation and coming together around issues related to resilience. So, like Jackie said, it's important to define resilience because everybody's using that word. It's very buzzy and it means a lot of different things to different people. So here in Chatham County, one of the issues, like Jackie mentioned, that we're dealing with is rapid growth. And here's some local facts and figures for you related to what's happening here for those of you that may or may not be familiar with that. Of course, the Hyundai EV plant that was recently constructed is projected to create at least 16,000 jobs. And that's really direct jobs, not to mention some of the support businesses that will pop up related to this. So that's a huge, and not to mention the physical siting of this, how large this site is and the support site, the support facilities. Of course, we've had Georgia Ports here, which has been booming for many years. It's now the second largest and fastest growing port on the East Coast. So this has an imprint both in Savannah, Chatham County and Brunswick, Glenn County, and even across the coast as warehouses spring up to support the logistics related to the ports. And then on top of that, you can add data centers, right? So now this is a new issue. And Jackie mentioned a figure of 40,000 people by 2040. The Georgia Office of Planning and Budget projects 200,000 people by 2050 across coastal Georgia. And for context, the population of Savannah is 135,000. The metropolitan population of Chatham County is 300,000. So this is a tremendous amount of people that are coming to the coast and that are going to need support and need homes, need services, all of the things. Layered on top of that, we're experiencing extreme weather in a lot of cases, hurricanes, flooding, and heat waves. Heat actually becoming sort of a prominent issue here in coastal Georgia. You can see this is a 2021 national figure. So that's not just true here in coastal Georgia, but it is, something that we're dealing with more and more, and local governments have to figure out how to provide the services needed related to that. And then, of course, all of the folks here that were anywhere in coastal Georgia during 2024 know that it was a very active tropical season. This is a picture of Bradley Point subdivision after Hurricane or Tropical Storm Debbie. But of course, Hurricane Helene also had major impacts throughout coastal Georgia. And we have aging infrastructure, right? So, and the infrastructure that's in place, both to support economic development as well as deal with some of these weather events, is growing older and becoming undersized as we grow. This is just some facts and figures. Again, but this is 2024 and not related to a tropical event. These are just those afternoon bursts, rain bursts that seem to be happening more frequently and are more intense. This is some information related to just a month worth of these kind of events in Savannah, and there was some major flooding related to these because the infrastructure system just wasn't capable of handling the rainfall rate. But like Jackie mentioned before, it's not just about dealing with weather events or major shocks. It takes a healthy community to be able to prepare for, withstand, and respond to these kind of events. And when you don't have, or when you need, when there's parts of the community that need additional help, that can be difficult. And so this can impact the conversation and why it's so important that resilience have a broad reach when we talk about planning, because we need to make sure that all sectors of the community have the ability to deal with these kinds of shocks. So when we define resilience, this is the definition we are working with here, and it's the ability of the community to handle both everyday challenges and sudden events. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie to walk you through the resilience roadmap. And Jackie, just a note, you can just like tell me to change slide or whatever.
Okay.
I will wait. I won't push you. Okay.
No, go ahead. We're good for the next one. But thank you.
Okay.
And Courtney does an awesome job, much more eloquent than myself, in kind of shaping, the background for this entire process. And I think just to reiterate, as we really started having these conversations between the county and Georgia Conservancy, excuse me, and RCC or Resilient Cities Catalyst, as to what we wanted this to look like. What did we need? What kind of assistance were we really looking for? You can go ahead to the next one, Courtney. We really, or at least myself, and I think everyone agreed as we started meshing and talking about this, is there has been so much amazing work done, for the past literal decades, right? We've done a ton of work. We've talked to our community. We know a lot of the issues. Not to say we know everything, but we have a really good idea of a lot of the foundational issues that are out there. So we wanted to take that information and look at what we already had and let's see what have we accomplished, what just kind of hasn't, it's stalled, which is the perfect word, right? And then figure out how do we lift these things up? How do we get some actual momentum behind some of these endeavors that we've been hearing from the community and staff even for so long? And let's start checking some boxes, right? That's what I keep going back to. So let's fill those gaps and just start getting some things accomplished. And that was a real big deal for me. I know, again, as we go out to the public, we all have these real strong projects we want to do, but I think our community, they're surveyed out. They're like, we've told you this time and time again. You're hearing the same things from us. Can we just start getting something done? So I can't reiterate that enough. Is a big foundation of this is to really build up what we've already accomplished and have worked on for so many years. And go ahead to the next one. So as part of this whole process to kind of go through, some of the methodology is, so what is going to get us to this final roadmap, if you will, is these real four main steps that we agreed on. Let's look at all the work that's been done. Let's look at all these hundreds of plans that are out there to a certain extent. Do an analysis of those and figure out what truly are those biggest risks for our community. And since then, maybe we've got some additional ones we need to look at. And then let's have conversations with our staff, internal. A lot of this process has been an internal, um, unincorporated Chatham County process, which, to be honest, I think it's been appreciated, and our staff is involved, and it's a lot of just conversations, well, we need to look at this, and da da da, this department's doing this and this one's doing this, but yet they may not know each other are doing that. I'm sure that never happens anywhere else. And then take all of these findings and this great information and figure out, again, what are those gaps and maybe what are some recommendations that we can offer from the resilience side of the house, and figure out some next steps for that. So go ahead, Courtney. As I mentioned, a lot of this there was a lot of research that went into this, and the RCC team, Resilient Cities Catalyst team, learned a lot about Chatham County and the region. This is not all of them, but what we really wanted to give them was, as much as possible, just a general good big picture of the community. Of course, comprehensive plans were important, but looking at the regional plans from the Coastal Regional Commission, when you're talking about water and sewer, we needed our flooding plans, but also looking at hazard mitigation. What about housing, transportation, homelessness? The next slide has even more, some more list of plans. We looked at greenways, And again, housing, like I mentioned, and land use, of course, is a huge one throughout this conversation. So as we started to delve into this, they helped us really pull all of this information together. And there is a ton, as you can imagine. It's funny, but it's not funny. Through all these plans, there were 700 plus like strategies in these plans, which says a lot that we put a lot of work and effort into them. But like, oh my gosh, how do we whittle that down and where do we start? And the underlying I guess, theme through this whole process is really to understand what are the extreme shocks and stressors that are developing, all of these strategies and everything like that. So, but as a foundation, understanding that shocks and stressors are different. They correlate, but that shock is uh, a real sudden event like a hurricane, right? And then the stressors are those underlying challenges that we deal with on so many different levels every single day. I think this list here is a lot of what we heard. We understand that flooding, like the pictures that Courtney mentioned, not just hurricanes or storms, but just those heavy rainfall events in the afternoon, are really major shocks, but also the extreme heat that we're feeling more and more of. But who knew that we were going to have snow here in Chatham County, 2 years in a row? This is something that is new for us, and we're having to stand up new assistance mechanisms from that, cooling centers and heating centers and that type of thing. And then, of course, for example, COVID, a pandemic, and who knew that was going to come about? And then on the next slide, we'll see some of those, as we kind of hinted at, what are the key stresses? And these are the things where you're looking at your other players in the community that really hit at these resources, and you rely on these other entities, United Way, Red Cross, Salvation Army, the Homeless Authority, all of these things that come into play, and they assist with a lot of these individual stressors at the human scale. And then it's perfect what it says. It's that slow burning underlying challenges. And I like to give a real world example that, you've got a family who working every day, and their kids need to go to daycare so they can go to work so they can pay their bills, right? Well, the daycare has closed because someone is sick. Now, what do you do? How do you pivot? That becomes a huge stressor on the family to make sure that they can continue living their lives. So some of these underlying stresses that came out of these conversations just with staff and the providers that we have are what you see here. Housing is a huge issue. We are over 15,000 units short in the coastal community, in the coastal region, within Chatham County, in this area. That's huge. Talk about a stressor. Oh my gosh. So all of these play onto that. And this is a lot of what we heard. So through all of this, then the next step is how do we take all of this and kind of build resilience together? So yes, we listen to the community. We've built on that. We are trying to get the big picture, the whole picture, and then work across all the different departments, and then take some action. I will say we also selectively did go out to some community groups, homeowners associations, some faith-based organizations, and selectively asked, hey, can we come sit down with you and have coffee and go through, like, what are you hearing? What are you finding? What are your challenges that you're, hearing from your community? So it was very selective in that regards, to build on as bigger takeaways from what we thought we were hearing, and just make sure we were, really zoning in on the right strategies and that type of thing. And then last, how do we turn these into projects that are really truly going to make a difference and shape people's lives in the community. And again, I go to, let's start checking some boxes, right? So the next phase of that, if you will, as I mentioned, pulling all of that together. We also went to, this is just a screenshot. As I mentioned, we talked to stakeholders, we talked to staff, we did go out additionally, and we had some cool maps and as we went out and really were very specific with what we were asking the community. Taking this, as you can kind of see, the big map of Chatham County and saying, if you could put a dot on this, within the county, and these 4 areas of heat or flooding or traffic, where would you see that in the county? And then asking them additionally, kind of that lower level, coming down a little bit, of these list of, I think, 16 or so sudden events, what would be your top 3 that's affecting you and your neighbors? And I really went out and I was talking about the hurricanes and tropical storms because we had never really seen that type of involvement. We had never seen that type of impact here on the coast. Very different storms. And we saw neighbors coming together to help neighbors. And what did that look like? What did that mean? Where were some of those shortfalls? And then asking that question, what is it that we could do? And this is fine. The next slide. What is it that we could do that would help make a difference? So as a graphic, if you will, these were, the 12 areas that we really, really heard a lot from the community on. And for those of us on the call, these are not new, right? But it was interesting. We heard more and more about childcare. And this is growing not just in the coastal region, but US wide as a main issue. Now, is it climate related? Absolutely. In the sense of, as I mentioned, it's all interrelated into resilience of a community and how the local government can support those efforts, if you will. As you can imagine, food insecurity and those type of things are, of course, something that we've been paying attention to and working on guides for community gardens, improving our codes and ordinances for where you can have those and how the community can assist. Of course, that sunny day, high tide flooding, as Courtney mentioned. Previously, as kind of noted, I'm from Savannah. In my lifetime, as a child, we did not have major highways flooding over just due to high tides. That just didn't happen. So in, the 50 years plus that I've been here, that's something that's now consistently happening multiple times of a year. So these are things that are affecting us more and more. And as from the local government perspective, understanding, all right, now we need to prioritize and figure out again, how we lift up these efforts. Additionally, number 6 is something that we've started dealing with and figuring out what do we do next. For reference, Chatham County, unincorporated Chatham County, we're not in the water and sewer business. We do not own a water treatment system, or excuse me, water supply system, and we do not own a wastewater treatment system. However, on the coast, we are having more and more failures of septic systems due to our rising groundwater tables. And it becomes that tough chicken and the egg. We want to get people off of septic, but yet unincorporated, we don't have systems to put them on. So it's a tough conversation, and we're working through that, as you can imagine, and then throw on a ton of rainfall and saturated grounds. And this is a whole new lovely thing that we're trying to work around right now. So as you can imagine, all of these things, these 12 things, really, there's always going to be in some way a climate impact. And that's where resilience is important in this conversation. So where are we at right now, and what are the next steps as we continue to move forward? We are winding down into the end of this particular focus of the assistance and the grants that Chatham County has been lucky enough to been awarded. It actually ends in next month, the end of July. So we are really getting down to the nitty gritty. The team is actually in town as we speak with us this week, and we are having continued kind of follow-up conversations with the internal staff. Those four areas that we've been able to whittle it down to, looking at housing, looking at finance and governance systems, and those type of things. We're now having those follow-up conversations with our staff and figuring out what are some flagship opportunities that we can work with them on to really, again, lift up where they may have needed help, and that kind of thing. And then work on resources, those type of efforts, what everything that comes along with those type of efforts, right? And move forward with that. So we are in somewhat of the final stages, which is exciting. I will say this has been a very different process and project that I've been working on. It's been a really, really phenomenal team, with Courtney and Resilient Cities Catalyst, and the team that actually supports and was providing the grant opportunities at that national level. It has been 100%. They've provided resources. They've provided a lot of cohort support, which has been amazing. Like just ask questions, and every month there's something they're checking in, like, what do you need? Because as Courtney mentioned, the whole, I guess, backbone of this thing is to get into communities who really need the help and they don't have the resources. Um, Chatham County is a bigger community, but I'm a one woman show. I know others on this call. I know Courtney's gonna know what I'm about to say. I like to say I'm a team of three, me, myself, and I. So we're doing good stuff. But it's a lot for a little community, or a little department. Now imagine a smaller community, and I can, there it's just a lot. So the intent of this also is to be able to take this out to other communities with lessons learned, like, hey, here's what worked for us, but even more importantly, here's what did not work for us. Here's some major roadblocks, and maybe think about those a little bit differently and that type of thing. So all of that to say, I've been really excited about this process. I do think there is a lot of opportunity for this type of effort to grow and replicate. The roadmap in itself is a little bit different, and I think hopefully this will work for us. And if we get two steps ahead in accomplishing something, that's a good day, right? So I hope that other communities will be able to tap into this. Chatham County was the only community in Georgia to get it, that I think second round. So woohoo to us. But there's a lot more competition out there because communities are seeing how great this is, to have that support. And even better, it didn't cost Chatham County anything. So, our elected officials and management were like, oh, yeah, this is great. So, all of that being said, we are kind of nearing the end, as I mentioned, of the analysis and pulling everything together. And I will definitely be sharing, the final report and our next steps as we move forward with Megan, and blasting it out. So hopefully we can share it with the whole state. But what is important is that that's definitely not the last of it, right? There's a ton of work that will come afterwards. But this is helping us really think a little bit different and more collectively and get a strong hold on what we do next. So that is ours. Thank you very much for listening. And I think we've got the one other slide if you're able to or interested in getting our information on the programs for myself and Courtney. We would love to hear from you. So I'll turn it back over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Courtney. That was really great. Um, we have time for questions, so if anybody wants to ask a question, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and feel free to ask directly.
This is the worst part if no one has any questions.
I'll go because I've got a question.
Okay.
How do you get the buy-in from the communities? You talked about all the plans that Chatham has, right? So many and so many that don't get used. How do you get the buy-in to proceed with something else? Now, knowing that this was paid for also helps, I'm sure, but how do you get that community to kind of say, okay, we're going to take a hold of this, we're going to use what we have that we never used before, and we're going to make something.
I think it's an understanding, and this was again kind of what I pushed, an understanding that I know these folks at the table, and I literally would say this, I know that you've been here before. I know that you've answered questions and tried to help before, and I know your concerns are in these documents, and I want to be respectful of that.
Mhm.
And literally saying that to them, it lends itself, I think, hopefully, to an ownership of their previous work, and that the community is hearing them, that the local government is hearing them, because so many times that's that's the biggest or one of the biggest complaints. Like, I've said this over and over and over and no one's listening, and I want to be super respectful of that. Now, it's also being very clear that I may not be able to fix all the problems right now, or this is going to be super expensive, or whatever that reasoning might be. It's a little bit different than we originally talked, whatever. But literally listening to the community, I think is so important. And I want them to know, because I've heard it. I'm like, I know, Miss Davis, you're a champ. You are our out at every HOA meeting. You come to all these meetings. This is, you feel it's important. Yeah, I hear you. I can't guarantee everything, but dang it, I hear you. You know what I mean? And I think that builds a partnership. I think that builds support. And really, honestly, it's really what we should be doing anyway. It's building on that. And I think what's different about this project is it's not a new plan, because these are the same, they're somewhere in that, say, 700 list of 700 strategies and whatnot. It's instead funneling down to what we at the Chatham County level, within more of our in-house type, can do, and kind of keeping us super focused, if that makes sense. It's kind of that next step, that it's the implementation piece, if that makes sense a little bit more. So I've been, again, very transparent when we're talking with these groups, that I don't want to necessarily discount anything you've already said. Here's what we've got. Is this still true? Because this is what you said before, and I'd like to work on this, which is a little bit different of a conversation, in my opinion. And I think it's been good. I do think this is going to continue for a while, because we've got a lot of work to do, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question, kind of?
it does. It does. Yeah. Thank you. Uh, Ben has a question in the chat. What are some of your favorite success stories from this project?
And I'll take that one, Jackie, if you
Cool.
want.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going, but yeah.
Well, we'll see, because
Yeah.
you can share yours. But so actually yesterday, we had a meeting related to one of the what we're calling flagship initiatives, and this is, one of the focus areas that we're extracting out. Jackie mentioned 700 different action items, and this plan, the process will of course honor all of those, but has selected some what we're calling, key or flagship initiatives, and some low-hanging fruit associated with that, so you can start to see immediate success, which of course then builds support for the plan. So one of those is related to housing. And of course, a local government trying to uh, tackle the issue of affordable housing isn't necessarily easy, because that's not a local government's natural place or state to be actively engaging in housing. And so as part of this conversation we had yesterday, Jackie pulled together different staff, people from different departments that touch the issue of housing. You know, somebody from engineering that might deal with water and sewer service, somebody from zoning that deals with zoning and building permit approvals, and then somebody who actually is given the actual task of coordinating housing in Chatham County. And I think you said to me afterwards, Jackie, this was the first time these people were in a room together talking about
Yeah,
this issue. And
yeah,
I think that's really powerful in that, you know, people at local governments are so busy, have so many, have to focus on their day job, on whatever is in front of them at that exact at that moment, and often don't get a chance to just come together around an issue, especially from an interdepartmental standpoint, right? A lot of times the departments are very siloed, coming together around an issue and starting to figure out how together they can start to tackle one thing. I mean, there's a whole host of issues related to affordable housing, but like just talking about one, what are some low-hanging, achievable things we can accomplish together. I thought that was a huge success. I don't know if that was what you thought I was
I
going to say, Jackie.
it wasn't necessarily, but I agree. And Courtney was exactly right. As I was sitting there yesterday, it's like, wow, I didn't even think about it. These guys haven't even all been in the same room together, having this somewhat different conversation. And as we know, that's a big deal, you know? And I was like, okay, this is good. This is good. And out of that, thoughts like, okay, we need to get them together regularly meeting and just like sit around coffee and let's talk about some stuff. How can change some processes or maybe this is good, that kind of thing, because these are the folks that are doing the work, these are the guys actually going through and approving and planning and everything. And it was good. It was really good. And it seemed so simple, but yet it hadn't happened, you know?
Mhm.
And I think the other thing I was going to mention was just it too is around housing. We met with a pastor, um, actually two different pastors, just, doing some gut check conversations with them about what we had heard. And the conversation for their particular community also led to housing. And it opened up some ideas around opportunities, what the individual, the churches might be able to do within housing that we hadn't necessarily thought about before. Um, because Chatham hasn't always been in the housing realm. City of Savannah is much bigger and they have a housing department. We don't have a housing department. We don't have housing staff, all of these things. But as we progress to a bigger need, bigger coastal region, we're recognizing, okay, we have to get into that world. So having the conversations with this faith-based group led us to some additional ideas that we hadn't tapped into that maybe we sit down with them and see how can we partner together on some initiatives, and get some real fundamental changes made in the housing realm. And it may or may not work, but it was a really kind of like light bulb moment that I was like, oh, this could be good.
Mhm. And
Kind of
I,
exciting conversation.
Yeah, I will second that. I mean, specifically these pastors who, when you think about churches in the unincorporated county or any house of worship in the unincorporated county, often they have a lot of land, right? These are larger,
Right.
they're not like landlocked the way, say, in downtown Savannah, it's a very small lot line to lot line building. They have large swaths of land, and they actually had decided that to serve their congregation and their communities, they wanted to see could they have housing on affordable housing on their property, right? So when we thought about that, we're like, wow, think about scaling that. How many houses of worship there are throughout the county that have these like large pieces of land that aren't utilized. Often their congregations are shrinking and they need a funding source, right? They're struggling to meet their funding needs, and they have this, and they also want to provide this service. So it was like really a like this perfect marriage of needs, all coming together, and actually, this solution, if it works or if it moves forward, could potentially solve a lot of different issues. And I would wanted to mention one other one that I thought was a big success, Jackie, is this, you know, we keep talking about, oh, there's all these existing plans and we're trying to extract information out of these plans and move it forward. And the question is, why hasn't it moved forward, right?
Right.
What was the hurdle? What was the roadblock before? And it really came out actually pretty early on in this process that one of the hurdles, which also becomes then an opportunity, is the internal county budgeting process, right? Looking at
Right.
how does that budgeting process consider resilience issues when they are funding, say, capital projects or services or whatever they're funding, because there's often a disconnect where staff have an idea and want to do something, but yet that doesn't translate through to funding and other things get funded. Uh, and that was a real like light bulb moment to say, okay, how can
Mhm.
we actually affect this internal process so that it is more it serves the resilience initiatives of the county.
Right.
And so
Right.
that is, in all of the planning work we've done before, I don't know that I've ever seen that tackled that way, I should say. So that I
Yes.
thought is a huge success.
And I will preface that to say, this is a new one. This is, as you can imagine, internal governance, and it's that whole, well, we've been doing it this way for the past 20 years. Well, could we maybe do something a little different, or add in a different component or something like that? Could I join you in a conversation? Something. So we are having some of those meetings today, and I hope that, I'm going to look at that one as baby steps. There's a lot of human involvement in that one, and jobs and how things are processed. But as Courtney mentioned, yeah, I mean, it's huge. As we sat down and started talking to the different groups and realized, wait, oh, they're applying for this grant for that. Oh, well, so are they. And they also, someone different applied for capital dollars, in the annual budget to do something similar. Like, we all need to we got to figure out something where we can talk. And so much of this process has been about that human scale. When you really, let's just talk to one another and have some sort of communication process. You can get a lot of stuff accomplished. You can figure out, ways to get around, and maybe you just change things, period, for the better, maybe the worse, who knows? But I think that has been one of the biggest kind of eye-opening pieces for this, is that a lot of it comes down to, let's just get in a room and figure out what we can do different to make a difference, and make improvements, and get some stuff done. So it's refreshing, because, as you can tell, I like talking to people.
Yeah.
But it's still a lot of work, not gonna lie. But I think it's moving in the right direction, because we're doing something a little different. But okay, I'll be quiet for a second.
Does anyone else have a question for Jackie or Courtney? All right, I have one more. For
Okay.
those who are going to watch this later, what kind of advice do you have for some of these smaller communities that aren't quite in this, I don't want to call it a fix, but in this level of need that Chatham is in, with all of the things that you've kind of listed out with the aging and failing infrastructure and things like that? Kind of what do you see as a first step for some of these smaller communities that still have that manageable scale?
Good question.
I would, yeah. I mean, my thought is that if that every community has issues. They might not be the same as Chatham County, um, or but they in all, every community has vulnerabilities and is dealing with various shocks and stressors. They might be different. I think if at any point, taking those first steps, what we did in Statesboro and what we did in Darien and McIntosh County, just having a conversation, getting different uh, sectors together to have a conversation about what are the issues we're dealing with. And if you're not dealing with issues, that's great. I haven't met somebody yet not dealing with issues, but I think that would be a great place to start. Just we did these resilience workshops. I mean, it doesn't have to be as formalized as that. It can just be a meeting. Let's get together over lunch and pull together some of the social service nonprofits, pull together the local governments, pull together maybe some of the larger business or economic leaders in the community, and just try to figure out what are our shocks and stresses? What do we need to start tackling? It doesn't have to be, understanding where you're at is a huge part of the process.
Agreed, agreed. And I think part of everyone's typical frustration is like with a comprehensive plan, if you're familiar with that, within a comprehensive plan, it doesn't delve into everything. And that's part of, you know, um, but it's a good starting point because in there, if you've gone through that process, you list, your weaknesses and some of your shockers and what those strategies might be at the bigger scale, but then it often just goes on the shelf. And that's what we've talked about. Instead, let's pull that out and pull out some of those strategies and just get people in a room and let's talk about them and figure out how can we just do two, out of all of them. But there's got to be somewhat of a champion. I mean, it comes down to that human being. You need someone who's willing to kind of hold those reins and say, yeah, this is y'all, we've got to stay on task. And maybe it's an outside, non-government person. And maybe it's that community champion who's willing to help the local government. And it depends on your community. Sometimes those grassroots kind of initiatives will get you much further than from the top down. So it's important to recognize what your community, the makeup is. I often tell my community, like if I go out and I'm like, please put in a service request or please let someone know that because they're going to listen to you, and it's going to make its way to my desk. But I might have been saying that same thing for 20 years, but it's that squeaky wheel and just having someone to really, again, hold those reins and move something forward, anything forward. But I cannot reiterate enough how important it is to get people in a room together and have conversations. That meeting yesterday, let's see, I think there might have been 7 of us or so, and it was super important. And you realize, and it came up too, there was a conversation, my bad, but hey, I was at a meeting, and 2 of the guys looked at each other and were like, why were we not at that meeting? I'm like, sorry. you know so there's this realization that, oh, you're right, I should have invited you to that meeting. And so, it's that but to do that, you've got to have conversations. You've got to get people in a room and have conversations. I don't even know how to get around it. I'm a big proponent of just pull everyone to the table who's working in that arena, not too many, enough to keep actionable, and just have conversations because you're going to come up with a lot of good stuff. You're going to get support. You're going to see the people in the room are going to feel supported, recognize who some of those other players are, and you can get a whole lot more done. That's just my opinion. But anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Um, Well, I don't see anyone else having any more questions. So, just a huge thank you, both Courtney and Jackie, for sharing this and for going through kind of these steps and the importance of the program itself and the roadmap. And it's not a plan, but
Right.
just allowing us to kind of hear how this works and how it can be used in our other communities. So
Awesome.
thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending. And I will send this out to all the registered participants as well.
And don't worry, when we have everything kind of finalized, I will blast it to you as well to share.
Perfect. Perfect. Wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much for
much.
having us.
All right, thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much. It was a lot of fun.
Bye.
Bye.